Doesn't start well.
To me, she's there.
Hello. Hi, I'd like to welcome you all to our publishing session, Publishing Graphene Research. As you all know, publishing your research is one of the most important things you can do to become visible. And today we've got four excellent panelists. Three will be presenting their publications, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion. So we're going to start today with Alex Wotherspoon. He's the publisher for 2D Materials.
Thank you very much. Okay, hello everybody. Hi. Thank you, Rebecca, for organizing this session and for welcoming us. Thank you. Yes, so my name's Alex Wotherspoon. I am the publisher of the journal 2D Materials at the Institute of Physics in the UK. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about the Institute, but really about the journal 2D Materials. So to present some key numbers, some key stats about the journal, some thinking behind its launch. It's a relatively new title, and really some updates about it and what we plan for it for the future and so on. So to begin with a little bit about the Institute, I'm sure most of you are aware of the Institute of Physics. So we're a not-for-profit society based in London in the UK, almost 150 years old now, so getting on for 150 years old, the Institute. We have increasing membership, worldwide membership, and the goal of the Institute is really to the advancement of physics research, application and education, both within the UK and globally, indeed. And to do that, we engage with a number of different people, a number of different societies, and so on, to really increase that awareness of physics research in the UK and overseas. So I and my colleagues here work in the publishing department within the Institute of Physics, and that's based in Bristol. And our primary output of research are these academic publications, that some of which are shown on the image here. And we publish around about 75 journals now at the Institute. In addition to that, we do have a designated journalistic team that works in-house and on a number of titles. And Physics World is probably arguably one of the most well-known titles at the Institute. And very recently, we launched an ebooks campaign, so just going back a few years, where we now publish electronic books that cover physics and indeed subjects beyond and so on. So, sort of focusing in a little bit, these are the 12 journals that make up the materials portfolio at IOP Publishing. So these are the 12, and 2D Materials is up there at the top left of that image. There's a few other titles here just to mention. Nanotechnology, which is celebrating its 30th year next year, is the first journal dedicated to nanoscale science and technology. We have the Journal of Physics series, so the condensed matter and applied physics. Those journals both very, very well known and been in existence for a number of decades. So these 12 journals here in materials research at the Institute of Physics. So looking back now to really the justification for launch of 2D Materials, so a number of conversations were had around about between 2011 and 2013, really, to see in response to what we saw in the field and the number of graphene articles that were being published within the literature. So we saw this massive growth of articles that were related in some way or another to graphene. And we noticed that these articles were published in very, very, very many different places. So there were a few hundred journals really that were publishing these. And increasingly, these journals were across many disciplines and many subject areas, and as the applications of graphene covered more and more areas. We also noticed that there was no particular designated single journal that covered 2D materials as a whole, and so we thought this was a nice opportunity here. We then had a number of trips to conferences and met with lots of people and spoke about this and whether there was a need for a journal 2D materials in the community, and the conclusion to that was yes. So we started working. The first thing we did was implement an editorial board, and just come from a board meeting now with the journal's board this morning, where Vladimir Falco, who's our editor, back at the point, it remains our editor, and was chairing that meeting. We have Byung-hee Hyung, our regional editor for Asia, and Joan, who's joined the journal relatively recently to cover the North Americas. And together with the board, we came up with this mission statement, which is really probably the most critical thing I think I'll present today, and it's a description of, I guess, where we see 2D materials position, not within IP, but within the greater sort of publishing landscape, I guess. So it's the standard and the journal sits at. And just to highlight a couple of things here, we feel that submissions must be really essential reading for a particular subfield of research, but that they must have greater benefit and interest to the community and really be long-lasting. So that's very, very critical. I should stress that if articles coming into 2D materials, we think that they would be better suited, or indeed the authors agree they'd be better suited into another IP journal, then that transfer mechanism does exist from 2DM to other titles. So that's who we are, that's the justification for launch. Here's some numbers. So we started just 4 years back in 2014, and in fact the launch was at this Graphene Week event back in Gothenburg in Sweden in 2014. And back then in that first year, we just received really a few dozen papers, like 50 or 60 submissions to the journal, and that's up around about getting on for 1,500 now as of last year, the last complete year. Submissions, sorry, there's a lot of data, lots of numbers on here, but submissions really are very broad. So we see submissions from everywhere to the journal. That's the message here. So there's a wide range of countries submitting to the journal, and this number goes up and up over time. 2D Materials is a hybrid journal, so we have an open access option, but we also have traditional subscription model publishing. And this little plot here just shows the rate of open access uptake over those 4 years that we've been in existence. So around about 1 in 5 of the authors publishing in the journal at the moment take up this open access offer within the journal. Interesting here, the download, so this is the number of times an article is downloaded within the journal over time. And what is nice here, is that the readership extends to so many countries, and there are lots and lots of people reading our articles and so on. But also that the average number of downloads each article receives over time is increasing. So not just the total downloads, which is shown here, but newer content in the journal is getting read and read more and more than, say, content last year and the previous year and so on. So that rate of readership is increasing. And indeed, the rate of citations the journal is receiving is also going up. So, of course, we may expect cumulative citations to go up, which this plot shows here as we publish more things. But the rate at which citations are increasing is faster than the number of articles that we're publishing, or the rate of articles we're publishing. And based on that and a couple of other metrics, the immediacy index and a couple of other things, we expect the impact factor of the journal, which is around about 7 at the moment, to increase next year and indeed in future years also. I mentioned at the beginning that we have this designated journalistic team in the Institute, and so that when a paper is published in 2DM, it's not the end of its lifetime by any stretch. So we have a number of the articles that are covered by some of the news agencies and so on that are listed here. We also have the ability for each article to have this metrics tag, so this label of how much an article has been covered through social media and different media pickup and so on. Okay, so I guess one of the principal reasons for us coming here this week and how we generate lots of benefit out of this event is to meet yourselves and to try and understand what really are the cutting-edge topics in the field at the moment. And this informs us in terms of the sort of articles that we try to solicit, commission, and publish within the journal. So here are just a handful of the focus issues that we publish in 2D materials. So this is an ongoing program of issues, of little clusters of articles around a given subject area. And these subject areas have been identified through communications with the editorial board and with yourselves and with other authors and so on. And so we really feel that by doing this, we're publishing the research that's at the very cutting edge of it and really leading the way within that field. Okay, I've just got this slide and one more. So just to summarize, the journal is still very young, it's 4 years old, but we do think that we've come some way to achieving the goals that we set out when we set up back in 2014. And we have lots of plans for new things and new ideas, and it's lovely to get some more from speaking to people this week. My final slide that I'll leave up is just a little notice of a couple of big roadmap articles that we have coming soon that will be published in the next couple of months or so within the journal, next few months or so. And that's through the collaboration with the Flagship, so a couple of these roadmap articles. So thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Costas Galiotis, who is the Editor-in-Chief for Graphene Technology.
Yeah. Okay, Graphene Technologies, maybe you haven't heard of it as yet, is a new journal, which in fact was initiated by Springer Nature in 2016. The first issue came out in 2016. As the title says, of course, it's really focused on technology, not on basic research, but like most other journals do. So it's a forum really for commercial or even practical applications of graphene and other 2D materials. It covers studies on graphene markets. There are a lot of reports already been published, and of course publishes interviews in that sense with prominent scientists in the field. So the difference between, let's say, other journals there is the fact that we concentrate on technological issues. Of course, as you know, the dividing line cannot be that clear sometimes, but it's important to stress that technology is the main thing here, and applications and all kinds of forms and structures of graphene into the materials are accepted, like graphene sheets, nanoplatelets, graphene nanotubes and fibers, dispersants, composites, etc. So as I said, it's a new journal, and I took over in 2007, about a year and a bit ago, a year and a half ago. You will see here the editorial board. The deputy editor so far was Antonio Castro Neto. I'm sure you know him, but I'm afraid he will be stepping down because he now is getting involved with commercial activities, running companies in Singapore, so we'll be replacing him soon. We have a news and in-house news and views editor, which is Dexter Johnson. As you see here, the associate editors, very well-known people from all over the globe, Arindan Ghosh, Christian Punkt, and Wen K. Ren from China, and a whole list of eminent scientists in the field of graphene into the materials. I'm sure you know that a lot of them are here: Maya de Rutuza, Aravind, Francesco Bonacorso, Luigi Colombo, Mar Garcia Hernandez, people that actually are present in this conference, among other people as well. So we think it's a great potential for expanding the journal and really making it a very strong journal in in the area of graphene technology and 2D material technology. At the moment, the speed of turning out a paper is very, very good. It's about 3 months. Obviously, when the flow rate increases, we don't expect to be so fast, but there again, it's pretty good at the moment. We, like other publishers, we, of course, abide to the publishing ethics. We're a member of COPE. I know maybe it doesn't mean anything to some of you, but publishing ethics is a very important area now for major publishers. We're using authenticate software for all the papers and publications we get. So we're checking for plagiarism and like other journals. And one thing I want to mention here is that from the very beginning we have a great interest from publications from the Far East. So this is, you see, Europe, 40% already is from Asia Pacific area. And of course, the other sort of areas like North America, Latin America, Middle East, still the journal is not very well known there as yet. So as you will see, the percentages are quite low, but as I said, Asia Pacific, and that's not surprising because, as you know, most applications you will find at the moment there is a lot of activity in graphene applications and commercialization, and from the Asia Pacific area. Of course, Europe is following as well. The news review section is, as I said, is very important, very interesting. Here we have 2 interviews that published earlier, one from Norbert Fabricius on standardization, and the other one is on commercialization from Antonio Castro Neto, who up to recently was, as I said, the deputy editor. And the benefits for authors is wide visibility because of Springer Nature. It's operating globally, easy article sharing, efficient publication process. So I'm well supported by the internal staff of Springer Nature. The headquarters in Germany, as you know. It's optional, of course, to publish open access. There are tools to track your impact. And of course, last but not least, you get a 40% book discount on all Springer publications. It's very easy to submit a paper. It's a very friendly website. All Springer websites are the same, so they're very friendly. And of course, like with other journals, if you're interested to act as a guest editor for a specific topic, technological topic, then of course we will welcome your ideas. You can write to me, or you can write to Myra Castro. Maybe you've seen Myra around conferences. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here with us this time, but she's the in-house publishing editor, so you can write either to me or to her, and we'll be very happy to serve you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
All right, and now I would like to present Elena Belsole, who's the chief editor for Communications Physics.
Okay.
It's not this one. It's not this one. It's not this talk. Yeah. Hi, thank you for being here. Thank you, Rebecca, for organizing this session. So I am the chief editor of Communication Physics, which is a new Nature Research journal. But today I'm going to showcase the Nature Research portfolio. So let me start with a little historical showcase. So Nature was launched in 1869, so next year is going to be 150 years. And peer review was introduced in 1967, so it's relatively a recent affair. And for a long time, Nature was just the magazine or journal Nature, but from the 1990s, we started to launch new products, mostly in life sciences, but very soon after into physical sciences as well. And with the publishing industry moving into open access, Nature Communications was launched into 2010, and then Scientific Reports in 2011. And finally, last year, we rebranded the whole portfolio and launched Nature Research as a whole portfolio. So what is Nature Research? It's a portfolio of high-quality products and services across the life, physical, chemical, and applied sciences. And we include research journals, magazines, review journals, as well as database and other research services. So for what concerns the Nature Research portfolio, you are probably all very familiar with Nature. And what Nature aims at publishing is research and studies that are significant for essentially the wider public, so widest importance and implications across the whole of the sciences. Then we have Nature Research journals. They are specific for each field, and they present a significant results, the most relevant results that advance the specific field. Nature Communications is our flagship open access journal. Again, Nature Communications publishes highly significant advances that influence the field and covers all fields across the natural sciences. And then we have the communications journals, which are a new entry from last year. I'm going to speak a bit more about them in the course of the talk, where still is very selective journals for important insight but into more focused areas of research. And finally, Scientific Reports is a journal covering across the natural sciences as well clinical sciences for rapid dissemination of technically sound and quality science. So let's delve a little bit into this portfolio. So we have the Nature-branded journals. So the research journals for the physical sciences, we are probably familiar with Nanotechnology, Nature Physics, and Nature Materials, as well as some of you for Nature Chemistry. These have been launched over the past 10 years. And this year, we also have Nature Electronics. You've probably seen a little leaflet in your bag that is recognizing the expansion of the field from a fundamental science perspective. The Nature Communication is our flagship open access journal, publishing top quality open access research. So what Nature Communications editors look for are new insights, new ideas, new technologies. So it has to be really significant advance. If the paper has a broad appeal, that's welcome. Doesn't need to be that way. But what is important is that this is really advancement of science. And let me just spend a little bit more on these new journals. So they were launched in 2017, actually last week, exactly a year. So we launched 3 journals in biology, chemistry, and physics. Obviously, for this community, the chemistry and physics journals are more relevant. And what we will focus on is new insights into specialized areas of research and still have quite selective criteria for conceptual advance as well as new applications. But at the same time, we have less stringent criteria for impact than the Nature branded journal. And another difference from some of the other journals in the Nature research portfolio is that we work together with an editorial board. So allow me to spend a little bit more time on communication physics, which is the journal I work for. Similar discussion would apply for communication chemistry or communication biology if any of you is interested into, for example, the biological applications of 2D materials. So it's an open access journal. We select papers for novelty and impact. So we really look into significant advances, bringing new insight into a specialized area of the physics or chemistry equivalently. The journal covers across the whole of the physical sciences, including theoretical applied. And one of the motivations for launching this new journal was that there are still a lot of research papers that present really, really very, very high novel research, but they just can't quite meet the very selective criteria or requirement of Nature Communications or some of the other Nature research journals. And what differentiates us as well from the other research journals in Nature is that we have adopted a combined editorial model whereby essentially professional editors work alongside editorial board members and both are involved into the peer review. What this means is that if you were to submit a paper to communication physics, your paper may be handled by an editorial board member or an internal editor or a professional editor. Then moving on, we have a number of relatively small journals that are published in partnership with some international partners, and they focus on very specific areas, some emerging areas. And here I just show the three journals that are relevant for this community. Moving away from original research, we have a couple of review journals. The first review journal in Nature research was the Nature Review Materials, and then recently we launched Nature Chemistry. And next year we are going to have a new entry, which is Nature Review Physics. It's a journal that will cover reviews in a bit of an original way, so we'll invite you to look into what is available online on this journal, because it's quite of an original model. And finally, scientific reports is for any research that is sound, that is original, and that needs rapid dissemination. So in the second half of my talk today, I would like to move from journals and focus a bit more on the science and look at what is hot in the flatland. As a matter of fact, I don't really need to tell you what's hot in the flatland, because you have heard it here in the past 2.5 days. But just allow me to go through a few examples of what has been published in the Nature research portfolio, just to give you a flavor of what we may look for when we consider papers in each of the journals. So I'm sure I don't need to speak more about this one. But this is the paper that was published early this year. Probably most of you have heard the talk by Pablo, like on Tuesday, and is obviously focused on the changes of the properties of the bilayer graphene when you kind of twist the angle, and most importantly is like how the superconductivity properties are changed. Then late last year, Nature Communications published perhaps the first 2D microprocessor where more than 100 atomically thin MOS2 transistors were connected, and I mean, it's a prototype, but it's probably one of initial example, and we have seen that nanoelectronics is expanding quite rapidly now. 2D magnetism is another theme that we have seen quite a lot in these days. These are just few examples here in some of the journals. And interlayer exciton manipulation in van der Waals heterostructures is also something that is really hot and is kind of opening the question of either whether exciton devices can be done at room temperature. So these are all very, very recent works, but another element of graphene research, or 2D materials rather, is biomedical applications and devices, and this paper published in Nature Communications shows one of these inspired biomedical materials. So obviously this doesn't cover all the research that is done in this field, which, as Alex has shown, has been rapidly expanding and that you have seen these days. But I just want to finish my talk today by showing that there are a lot of specialist editors working at the Nature Research journals. I've shown their faces here, and each one of them has a specialism into the specific area of science that they cover, and you are always welcome to contact them for any questions you may have. And finally, I would like to thank you for listening, and want to mention that my colleagues Olga and Sylvia are here for the rest of the week, so if you want to contact us or have other questions, just please find us in the various coffee breaks or lunch. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so now I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our fourth panelist, who is Olga Bubnova, who is a senior editor for Nature Nanotechnology. And I'd like to start the panel now with a question of my own, which is, what is the biggest mistake that people make when they submit a paper to your journal? Or maybe worded another way, what advice would you give to someone who was submitting a paper? I'll start with you, Olga, since you have not talked yet.
Yeah, I hope my microphone, is it working? Yeah, okay. Well, it's a good question. I guess the main point is to be very objective about your research and know for yourself what is the bar for each journal. I don't say that you have to know all the journals, of course, but if it goes to Nature or Science or Nature Research journals, Nature Communication, you should probably know more or less what we expect. If you don't, then you can always ask us, when you're at the conference. But what we see the most is that when people just are trying their luck, basically. They know that the article or letter is not at the level, but they still send it. So they're wasting their time, they're wasting our time, and the outcome is just as expected. We would reject it. So I think for me, that's the major problem. People are just either not very objective about the results of their research, like how much advancement they represent really. And if you're not sure, just send us a pre-submission and we will take a look at it, and it will save you some time. So I think don't submit if you're not sure. At least it has to be like a 50-50 situation, because otherwise you will surely spend at least 2-3 weeks waiting for the answer and then get rejected.
Anybody else have a thought on that question? Big mistakes, or Alex?
Well, I'd just like to say that probably the best thing that authors can do when they come to us is to really sort of spell out in the submission letter what it is that's novel and significant about the paper that they submit to us. So it helps us out no end with and by no means in depth, but a cover letter that states the significance and the novelty of the paper and its worth in the community, I guess.
Definitely a good tip.
For us, we're a new journal, so statistically, I don't have that many papers to base my conclusions on, but definitely what we realize is people haven't understood the topic of our journal, which is technology rather than applications. So we get quite often papers based on fundamental science, really. So we really have to reject them, not because of the low quality of the actual paper, but because they don't really comply with the subject matter of our own journal. So that's the only problem we're facing at the moment. So I cannot give you any further advice.
Great. At this point, I'd like to open up the floor for questions from the audience. If anyone had something they wanted to ask the editors and publishers here today. We've got one question here, Dan.
Hello. So this was particularly a question about a point that I think you made, Elena, about how you got the different editors, some professional and some academic. I was wondering how you manage like standardization between those two, because obviously they come from a very different background. And this can be a general question as well, but it was just specifically off that point you made.
Well, are you talking about the new journals that were launched last year?
I just meant in terms of when you get submissions, do you make sure that the response to different submissions is the same regardless of which type of editor, and sometimes down to the individual as well, I'm sure. How do you make sure that that's standardized?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's something that we have been thinking about very hard before considering this model. And the solution that we found is that essentially the external editors are trained practically in the same way as a professional editor is, and we have constant communication with them. So some of the journals available are entirely managed by an external editorial board or associate editors. You know, they are named in different ways. But in our case, we have, like, the paper is received in the office and is looked at by a professional editor in the first threshold, and then is sent then to an editorial board member. So there is always that dialogue between the external editor and the internal editor, which allows us to have an overview of all the papers, regardless as to whether they're gone outside or inside.
Alex, you also looked like you maybe wanted to...
Yeah, hi. I guess for us, as soon as a paper is submitted, it is assigned someone from the journal's editorial board to sort of become the manager or the guardian of that paper. And we have regular communications with the board as to what the standard and the quality of the journal is and so on. So I guess it's through that and through our internal staff meetings that we try to maintain that level across. But I sort of suppose ultimately, even when these things go through peer review and everything, there will be ultimately some potential differences of opinions through that's, I guess, inevitable in any academic means and so on. But for sure, it's that, I guess, the involvement of the board for us and is the way we manage that. Thank you.
Costas?
Yeah, we have a very simple hierarchical system. So I have 3 associate editors and a quite broad editorial board. So ideally, a paper arrives to me, and then I assign it to an associate editor, and then he or she will either send it to a member of the editorial board or to referees. At the moment, in order to speed up the whole process, and of course get the journal known to the general public and to all of you as well, I also quite often, just to expedite papers that are of great interest for the journal to be published, I just send it myself directly to referees. But of course, with the volume papers increasing, I won't be able to be doing that in future. So, but the system, that's how it should work. Associate editor, and they will then handle the papers themselves and communicate with the referees.
All right, next question. Either raise your hand or stand up if you have a question. I had another question of my own, actually, and it's kind of a broader question. What direction do you see the conversation about graphene and related materials moving in over the next year, a couple of years? What do you think you'll see more of, or what would you like to see more of in the journals? Olga, do you want to start?
Well, I can. I have to say that it's been 3 years since I started, attending these Graphene Week conferences, and I think what people were talking about 3 years ago now is sort of becoming a reality. Like, for example, this twist tonics, or whatever public calls like. I remember that in 2016, Costas Galiotis was only talking about some interesting physics that can emerge from, different twist angles and how we can leverage this property of 2D materials to learn about new fundamental phenomena and also use it in applications. And now we can see that it's actually happening. Another big thing from last year is, of course, 2D magnetism. I think that this is something that happened when the first original papers from Xiaodong-Xu and also from Pablo were published in Nature, and we see a lot of follow-up papers on that this year, and I think it will continue for some time. Also, as Elena already said, there is this interlay exciton phenomena that is being studied very actively at the moment. Again, just because I guess in monolayers and TMDs and graphene, all this has been studied for quite a while, and it's fairly well understood. So people are moving towards some more complex structures like heterojunctions, and that's where some interesting physics emerging at the moment. So that's what I see. I didn't think that we would see a lot of kind of purely fundamental graphene papers, but again, I was proven wrong. But I think that TMDs, it's kind of the main interest at the moment from what I see, from what we see in Nature Nano, for example. I think TMDs are kind of the most studied, and graphene just simply serves as some kind of a complementary material, if you want, in electrodes or whatever. Yeah, so I think it will be all about heterostructures and maybe twist tonics or whatever. I just like the word for a while, and then we'll see.
Great. And Costas, do you have a...
Yeah, well, in our case, we're in a very good sort of position because whole graphene is moving into applications. And there is great science in a lot of these applications, and in the various, and also excellent technologies emerging. I mean, if you look at the program of this conference, you look at the application sessions, there's so many beautiful and type of drives towards a lot of things like optoelectronics, even filters, membranes, composites, and even biomedical applications. So we really were in a very good position now to absorb, hopefully, all that great work has been done and to publish really excellent papers in these areas.
Thanks. And Alex, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Yes, I mean, yes. So we came from a board meeting earlier today where we've sort of talked about this very thing and about what subjects we might look to publish within next year and so on. And without giving too much away, I guess in there, there's a number of areas that we looked at and cover. But it's been very interesting, yes, just attending talks, attending sessions, and really learning about the other challenges, even like perhaps beyond the materials, that the challenges that there are within the marketplace and moving these products to market, and so into sort of large-scale applications. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Elena?
Yeah, I can only agree with what has been said so far, and maybe what I should add is that I think we would like to see perhaps a bit more, I mean, fundamental research is very, very important, but it's also interesting to look into the kind of move towards the industry side of 2D material research.
Any other questions? We've got a couple over here.
Yeah, so I have a question about this. So you all talk about application, but I still have the impression that the papers in the fundamental research on 2D materials are getting more attention and maybe more impact than the applied publications. Do you have the same impression, and how would you deal with that?
I think it's not really about what sort of advance, it is. It can be fundamental, or it can be in terms something, done in applications. It's really about the impact, the final impact. And I think that, like my journal, for example, we tend to publish more applied papers. So we always, by default, ask for some sort of a functionality demonstration. It's not always the case, it doesn't have to be, but this is what we are kind of aiming at, just to see what is the use in terms of applications. You do something really cool from the fundamental perspective, and usually that's what Nature and Science publish, right? But if the demonstration of, like, let's say, a device or functionality is so outstanding that it's really, an important leap forward technologically, then any journal would be, happy to publish it, I can assure you. It's just that maybe in applied physics and, like, in applications, it's maybe a little bit harder to make those, big improvements in terms of performance sometimes. But you can see lots of record papers published in very good journals, which is completely applied thing, like solar cells, or batteries. You see big improvement in, let's say, efficiency, PCE, whatever, and then you can see it published in a great journal. So I don't really think that fundamental advances are easier to publish. Maybe sometimes it's even harder, in my opinion. So it really depends on the scope of the journal and the broad appeal, because obviously, like Nature Physics, they would be looking for that, but not us.
Yeah, but they also get more citations usually. So what is really the reason for that?
Well, I wouldn't say that the most cited papers are actually fundamental papers. Like for my journal, it's absolutely not the case. The most cited paper of all times is on black phosphorus field effect transistors. So there was no new science, like from the fundamental point of view whatsoever. It's just the first experimental demonstration of a high mobility 2D material, which is stable, was stable in that conditions. Anyway, so for us, this is not the case. And also, if you look at, we're not talking about solar cells or perovskites here, but if you look at the number of citations those papers get, I think it's much more kind of, dominant in terms of citations than any fundamental paper would receive. But maybe it's just because those advances are often published in the highest kind of, ranked journals. That's why, by default, it gets cited. But I think I wouldn't say that there's a big difference between applied and fundamental physics in terms of citations. I wouldn't agree with you.
Okay.
Could I have your thoughts on open access policy? I think it may have been Alex that mentioned hybrid open access.
Yes.
I just recently read about the Plan S from 11 funding agencies in Europe. Do you see, do you have some ideas and thoughts on 100% open access in the near future, etc.?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, and again, we've had some dialogue this week about the trends in open access, and there's updates all the time, really, across different countries and almost country-wide open access policies that are happening now and dictating the way that an author must publish. Our feeling with 2D materials was that the best option was to give the author the choice, actually, and I think that's still our thoughts on it at the moment, so hence the hybrid thing. That said, we do have purely open access journals at the Institute, and we are aware that some funders and some bodies dictate that an author must publish in a purely gold OA journal, so we are aware of that too, and we monitor that trend. But honestly, we speak to people internationally all over the world to try and get a feel of what this global picture for open access is and what it might look like in the future. And honestly, it's not easy to predict or foretell what might happen. Actually, it's not true. We hear different things from different countries and even different people within the same country as to their thoughts. So it sounds like I'm sitting on the fence a little bit here with my answer to some degree, but I think really we are acting and responding to what we hear from the community, and we feel that certainly for these 2D materials and for this journal, the hybrid option remains the best for the time being and so on.
Elena, you looked like you had a thought.
Well, definitely open access has rocketed. There is more and more demand from funders, from authors, from research institutes to publish open access. The concept itself of open access is still very open in the sense that it is often interpreted in different ways. So for the time being, I think it is very important that the two publishing systems work alongside each other with purely open access journals offering that option to the authors as well as subscription journals. And then we have something in between, which is what Alex has been speaking about so far. I think that there is even more, there is a kind of an open movement that is very much talking a lot about open data, for example, at the moment, in addition to just making your paper open access and accessible to the world, but is a lot on kind of really reproducibility of research. Where this is going, I mean, the science seems to point in the direction that more and more research, as well as data, as well as coding, will be open access. The model for it is still quite unclear, but I think that, Nature Research, but also all other publishers offer enough options now for the authors to choose both the subject area, the level of impact of the journal, as well as the publishing model.
I think Costas also had some thoughts.
On that issue, I want to give you my personal view, which is rather different than what we heard. Open access by choice is okay. Okay, if you have a choice and you have the money and the funds to publish open access and pay the 4,000 or 5,000 euro for your paper is okay. But to be forced by funding organization to go open access, I don't find this acceptable. And this is what's happening now. Brussels, EU funding, even the Flagship, ERC, all the major organizations are forcing us to publish open access. And this is now speaking as an academic, not as editor-in-chief. And of course, I've already conveyed my views to Springer, to all the other, also to Brussels. Something else has to come out of this. I mean, the major institutions should cover the expenses for open access, but the individual, the researcher, should now be spending a very active researcher in a research program, more than 50,000 euro in order to publish 10 papers. I find this incredible. We can spend that money on research, on consumables. Of course, the money is limited. You cannot just, when you write an application, you cannot add 50,000, 100,000 for your papers. I find this an anomaly, and I hope this is somehow considered, somehow the funding agencies in liaison with the publishing houses come out with something else, a different scheme, because it's not acceptable as it is. This is not as an editor, just my personal view as a researcher, and it has to be aired, this view, I think.
And we have time for one last question. Let's see. Over here.
So I work in the field of chemistry of 2D materials, and our research covers a huge range from like organic synthesis in organic labs to trying to build and measure devices, lots of measurements, and also collaborate with people who do simulations and theoretical work. For research that has such a big breadth, where do you recommend publishing that? Because we've previously had reviewers say, it sounds science, but we just don't like this bit, so it's a rejection. So when you've got kind of some of this, some of that, some of something else, which I think is very common in nanotechnology. Where would you recommend is the place to submit that type of work?
Alex, do you want to start?
Yeah, so certainly, I think if I go back to what I said before about the cover letter, and so on, if you could accentuate where that, the parts of your research that are relevant, but it's true to say that we do publish articles within 2D materials that are relatively broad in their nature, so it doesn't have to be a niche thing by any stretch. So for sure, we would consider that the research that you just spelled out there. Again, I think for us and for us to understand, and for the board, if you can kind of put that in writing and spell it out exactly, that's a great help and benefit to us. Thank you. So I hope that heard that okay. Thank you.
And Elena, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, many journals covering like the breadth of a specific branch of science, like physics or chemistry, will look into interdisciplinary. Is that my mic? Sorry. Interdisciplinary research. There are then like journals that are even broader than that, like Nature Communications or Scientific Reports, and from what you describe now, your research should fit in any of these journals. So if you have interdisciplinary research, it's probably better to point at something that is broader rather than very niche.
That's actually all the time that we've got. So I'd like to really thank our panelists, Olga, Costas, Alex, and Elena, and encourage you to find them later during the coffee breaks and talk to them if you have any personal questions about your research and how to publish it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.